My name's Brent Patterson. I'm a professor at Buff State, and I've been using Blender. If anybody knows my work, I've been doing Blender stuff for over 20 years, from the grim days of Blender 2.0. I love making images, and I've been making films, websites, multimedia of all sorts since the early 90s. And so this talk was my attempt at trying to understand all of the color stuff. Because whenever you create a new document in one of your image tools or video tools, and it asks you what color space you're working in, it can get a little bit confusing. And so the best way I find to understand something is to try to teach it. And so this talk isn't perfect, and it's deeply flawed. I'm going to explain that here in a minute. But first of all, HDR talk is not this. It's not the crunchy granola images from the mid-2000s. It's not that kind of image making. It's not this. And so no. It's these kind of things. When we see these things, we're like, I guess everybody else knows about this. Right? And I've been doing this stuff for 30 years, and I look at this like, what the hell? What am I supposed to choose? Right? I'm looking at my colleague over there, Shasti, because, so I know I'm not alone, right? Okay, good, all right. So what are we to make all of this? And basically, there is a system to this. But what I've found in because I've done a deep dive over the past 2 months about all of this stuff, and I've bored the hell out of my kids telling them about it. But there's a bunch of French people, and they're just as disorganized as all of us. But this is where a lot of this comes from. I've tried to make sense of it. I'm not asking you to memorize it. I thought about making a really boring talk in 1940. So all of these kind of codes, I put it on a timeline, and this is only a small sliver of the gamut of all the color spaces, it's a pun, of all the color spaces that actually exist out there. It's a good joke, isn't it? Yeah, it's all right. It's only a small bit of all the things that we can actually see. But these are some of the most important ones. And the reason why it's really important now is most of us with our newer displays on our MacBooks or whatever computers we're using, but especially on our smartphones. Most of our smartphones now, for the past 5 or 6 years, have these abilities to display far more colors and brightness than we're actually taking advantage of. And the reason that's important, I'm going to get into later. But I became kind of fascinated by all of this stuff, and become what I call attenuated to this, because when I started my sort of career in high school, I did everything on VHS, right? And so this is a clip from VHS from the early 90s, right? And I digitized all my stuff. But it's stupid. I made dumb movies with my friends in high school, but I worked with what we might call the equivalent of like 240i resolution with VHS, and then in order to edit it, I had to copy it from one VCR to the next, and all that kind of stuff goes into what I was making. But I became acutely aware of the level of detail, of the color and so forth that I saw, and when I saw it on my little like 12-inch color TV when I was a kid, looked great. But when we move it over to the digital screen, it doesn't look great anymore, right? And I'm very curious why. But when I worked in broadcast TV and I worked in post-production throughout the 90s, we had the best equipment and so forth, but even all the stuff that we used back then kind of looks like crap now if we shot it in video. But this talk that I'm going to give today is inherently deeply flawed. And the reason it's deeply flawed is because I have to give you a talk talking about wide color gamuts and high dynamic range on a display that can't show any of that. And so basically it's like trying to show and explain to someone high definition on this TV, and by showing examples with this TV. So this talk is inherently flawed, and the only way that I found to get around that is you're going to see QR codes. And so you can pull up, scan the QR codes and maybe see some of what I'm talking about on your phones. If it's a premium phone. Most of us have like iPhones or whatever, and they can show most of this, what I'm kind of going to try to kind of show. But there is this 3-body problem with color. So they're all inherently related, and that's what I'm going to try to talk about. I'm going to talk about brightness, the color range, and then the color fidelity. And all of this is intrinsically tied to how bright our displays can be, how many colors our screens can show, and then how many colors in between the ranges of colors we can show. Most of our displays have greater capabilities than we're actually using these days, but this, and I assumed it would be an sRGB projector, is an 8-bit display. So I can't show any of that on this projector. And also the projector is a projector, it's not a display. So we're talking about lumens instead of nits, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. So when we're designing our stuff, and I was looking at all that stuff in Figma, and I was really dying to ask him, like, what about like different color spaces can we actually support now? Because that's how I'm thinking. But when we have a color gradient in any RGB channel, if we're working in 8 bits, we only have 256 gradient possibilities between black and white. When we're looking at it on this screen, it looks just fine. It looks like a pure gradient. And we're happy to see that. The human eye has a way of adjusting, this is bright, this is as bright as things get. But when we look at our new HDR displays, sometimes if you're scrolling through Instagram or whatever, you'll notice, why is that one so much brighter? Because Instagram supports HDR now if you're on an HDR display, but it also supports wider color gamuts. And I'm going to get into it to a certain degree, but we want our work to look as best as it can. And as everyone's adopting higher quality displays, if we're staying in 8 bits, our work is going to start to look dull compared to other people's work. And so I know when we talk about bits and so forth, it starts to get a little bit scary, but basically it comes down to this kind of color gradient. So most of us are here at 8 bits, and we've always been here at 8 bits since the 80s, and the color gradient looks smooth on an 8-bit screen. When we're at a lower definition, then we start seeing those color gradients. But if we exceed that on an 8-bit screen, it doesn't matter. So it'll look exactly the same, maybe even look worse. So things will change. And this is all an 8-bit display right here. And the only way I've ever crashed this computer, this is the new M5 Max or whatever, is building this and trying to show HDR stuff, SDR stuff at the same time and putting it on another screen. And I was on like 15% battery, and it's like, I'm done, and it freaked out. But the color fidelity is exponential. So most of the time we're working right here, and that's why we have millions of colors as the option when we're choosing that color space, because you have all these color possibilities. But when we're doing stuff for film, Netflix, Amazon Prime, they all work at about 10 bits now, but they shoot at a much higher rate, so that way their stuff is adaptable in the future. I don't want to get too technical because it gets really dry and really boring really quickly. But knowing that these other possibilities are there is important for future work. And so something I keep in mind is I'm creating a lot of work, and my students are creating a lot of work for planetariums right now. And my students do a lot of immersive video. If you go to the Bison's games, our students are doing all the animations for the Bison's game at Buff State, and so we do some really cool stuff. But our planetarium is a really cool planetarium at Buff State, and I'm speaking in Amsterdam in September about the work we're doing for that, but it only uses projectors right now. And those projectors can only handle 8-bit SDR, standard dynamic range images. And they look good, but one day the projectors will be updated, or we'll just have LED domes in the planetarium instead of projectors. And I want the work we're creating now to be adaptable. So we need to render at a higher resolution than we actually need. Not resolution, but a higher bit rate than we actually need right now to future-proof our work. And so that's something I'm trying to keep in mind. But like I said before, if you have something that looks fine on your screen now, and this looked great when I was 16 on my little CRT, it looked awesome. Look at the things coming out of it, like, yeah, I made awesome stuff. But when I throw that on the HD displays, it looks like poo. And we don't want even though it's got the rays coming out of my name, even though if we're making stuff in 8-bit right now, it might not look good for our website, since I don't update my website nearly enough, but I want the graphics to look good on the newer displays that are there in 5 years or so. And so I'm starting to upload my images and everything on my website in higher bit rates. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and try to stay on time and not get too boring. But let's talk about nits. If you've had kids, you know nits are the little eggs that you got to keep them home for a little while. It's an unfortunate name, but it's short for a Latin term which means brightness or shininess. Netier or something like that. But for whatever reason, we call them nits. But it's not those bugs. It's the brightness of a screen. And so I do a trick with my students. If I have like revulsion as an emotion or something in a lesson I'm trying to teach, they don't forget it. It's a learning trick. Sex works too, but tying what you're trying to teach to an emotion is a really effective tool as a teacher, and I do it a lot. So nits it's a standard, and it's technically equal to 1 candle over 1 square meter. And nits are different from lumens and lux and other measures of light, because when we look at a screen, the light is directly coming from the screen, and it measures the brightness emanating from the surface of that display. And that's what specifically nits are. And so here's a nice graph that talks about the different levels of brightness that we're used to with our displays right now. And so our old TV, when it was supposedly at full bright, was about 100 nits, depending on the TV. This varied really widely. Because there was no real standard. The signal for 100 nits was actually tied to just voltage, 1 volt. And so different TVs were different levels of brightness. Now it's kind of more codified how bright the actual display is. Most of your smartphones now, premium phones, that you can hold up and see the screens in broad daylight are 1,000 nits or more. I know the newer MacBooks are at like 1,600 nits. And so if I crank up something here really bright, especially at night when I'm in a dark room or something like that, I have to put on sunglasses to edit stuff. It's kind of absurd, and nobody wants that, but the ability is there, and they continue to get brighter. And that's most necessarily when you're working in a really bright space and you need to be able to see your work. Outdoor displays and so forth go even brighter. And so I'll try to avoid these kind of boring graphics, but this is a rough equivocation of the old like gamma or brightness of older displays that peaked out at 100 nits. But they never said nits back then, they just whatever brightness that screen was. And it's just a rough approximation. So right now where we sit is 100 nits is the actual brightness that we sort of peak out with sRGB, but we have a much larger headroom for that. And so this is the first QR code. So I didn't know if this was going to work, and it might break my website because it's all on my website, which is not the best host. So if everybody's loading this all at once and you're on a premium display, what you should see is that these gradients here are actually HDR gradients, and so the brights are past the 100 nits. They go further to about 1,500 nits, and you should see a much brighter gradient when you look at those. If I put in the wrong QR code, let me know.
That's right. No.
It's right. So do you see it? Am I lying, or is it different?
No, it's bright.
It's bright. Okay, good. Yeah, that's how it should look. It should look bright. I was thinking about just showing it on my computer and just turning it around, but because the computer is connected to an sRGB display, I don't get any of the HDR on this display. Normally it can switch between them. So on the 8-bit display, the same level of white looks the same on all 3 gradients. But on an HDR display, white is brighter. It's actually bright. And so that way, when you're watching a good show or looking at something like a lot of social media these days, the sun in the feed is actually bright, or whatever brightness is in the source. What that has the effect of doing is making whatever you're looking at more immersive. And if it's an OLED display or the micro LED display, the blacks are blacker, the brights are brighter. And I use waveforms. I used to laugh because I worked in broadcast in the 90s. Whenever we worked with the waveform graph, we would get a job at DeVry. But you can, never mind. But these are the new waveforms in Blender. And so if you're working in sRGB space, this is the same graphic, and this is an HDR graphic, but you have to crank down that graphic because when the elements peak past 1, everything will just look burnt out. But if you're working in HDR, you've got way more headroom. The brights can get brighter before things start to get overexposed. And so that's the next graphic that you can pull up on my website. And this is one page with 3 short little quick times showing that when you crank up the the exposure on this graphic to just its normal level, this is an HDR graphic being pumped through SDR. When it hits that 1 volt or 100 nits ceiling, everything becomes overexposed. But if you look at the next graphic, that's an HDR graphic, and this is where this is where my talk falls apart, because I'm trying to show HDR elements on an 8-bit screen. But I've got tons more headroom. So you don't see that signal hit the ceiling anymore. It can go higher. And so if you're on an HDR display, the details stay there. And that's the whole point. And so if I crank it past 1, if I crank it to like 1.5 or even 2, on this display says, I can't do it, it's all gonna break, and you start seeing all the compression and everything break apart. But if you're on an HDR display, it's the clouds, the detail, all are still there. And that's the bottom if you scroll down. And so you can make an HDR video, graphic, or whatever, upload it to whatever social media. If you're following all the right specs, your work is brighter. And so I know this seems kind of boring. It's kind of like this.
These go to 11.
And so I just said my age, didn't I? Yeah. All right. So I was worried there would be a lot of like Gen X or Gen Z in here. Not Gen X. If I show this to my students, they'll be like, what? He's got 211. All right, never mind. I'm making it not funny now. But you can crank it a lot higher. And actually, you can get really high on an HDR screen. But the problem is, I want to make a graphic that looks great on an HDR display, but doesn't look like poo on an 8-bit display. How do we do anything that's sort of backwards compatible? And that's really important because the penetration of HDR displays in the first world is pretty high, but globally it's about 55%. And so if you want your content to be viewable by everybody equally, you got to have a backwards compatible graphic. And so again, it's going to look like garbage on the 8-bit display because this is not a backwards compatible graphic. This is the sRGB version of it, but when I try to make the HDR version available on the 8-bit screen, it doesn't look good. If I look at it on my HDR display, it looks great. So we can make things brighter. And later on I'm going to show how to make this, but that's just the brightness. The other aspect about this is the millions of colors available to us. And I made this when I was hungry, so I put in a picture of a burrito. Okay, so talking about color. We have a lot of color available to us at 8 bits, but we still only get about 50%, well, not even that, a smaller portion of what's actually available to us. So has anyone seen this graph?
Yes.
Does it make sense to you?
No.
No. No, it doesn't make sense to me either. So in 1931, the Committee on Illumination, what was it called? The International Commission on Illumination. It was a French committee. They surveyed a couple dozen French people about color and what color looked like to them, and they tried to mathematically make a map of human color vision. And that's what this represents. And so the little numbers around it are the nanometers of the color, the wavelengths of the color, at full spectral chromaticity, like full, as colorful as they can get, and then they desaturate. And this is a 3-dimensional graph, so you don't see the z-axis that covers the other colors, but it's calculated by, you can plot any point on the graph and mathematically say, I can generate this color with this color. The problem is, what they're trying to do is they're trying to codify color to something that's rather squishy because it's perception, right? And so they've made new graphs. This Committee on Illumination have made multiple graphs since 1931 that try to better take into account that squishiness. But for whatever reason, entrenchment, people keep using this graph from 1931, and it's still used. When you buy a monitor, you might see inside of the instructions, this is the part of the display of what human vision can see. And so sRGB covers this part of that aspect. And so it's a small portion. So the real problem here is, I'm trying to say these are all the colors that human can see on a display that can only show this color, this amount of color, which is why it doesn't look right. So that cognitive leap is like, oh, that's why it doesn't make sense, right? Okay, good. So we don't have the display technology that can actually show us all the colors that we can actually see. And so sRGB or BT601, when they started digitizing video in 1982, covered roughly this part of the spectrum. The irony is the color specification for color television in 1953, I said it wasn't going to get boring, I'm sorry, but actually was much broader than this. It was when they digitized 8-bit graphics in 1982, they made it a little bit smaller to keep it under control, to keep file sizes and stuff under control. I put this here to make print people happy. Yeah, all right. So this is a better idea of all of those different color spectrums and so forth. This QR code, it goes to widegamut.com. And what that allows you to do, has anyone ever gone to this website?
No.
It's a really cool test. It'll actually show you what your display is capable of showing in terms of color, in terms of high dynamic range, and so forth. And so it's a great way when you test a display to see what the quality of that display actually is. And they've got all these different tests that'll say it can show this, it can't show that. And so it's a really useful tool for controlling all of that. So P3 was set up in 2005 when cinema started going digital. And it basically shows a much broader color spectrum than sRGB can show. But you can see it still doesn't show the full spectrum that human vision can actually see. The best one that we have is Pro Photo RGB, and that's used for basically print. But Pro Photo RGB can actually show colors that go beyond human vision. And that's kind of cool. And so most of your main graphic programs does have Pro Photo RGB as a color space option. Whenever you use higher color spaces, of course, higher bit depth, more color range, you exponentiate the processing power needed and the data size needed to process all this, but with a big caveat. Yes?
So I'm just curious, do you know whether or not when they're shooting now when they're shooting digitally, like for professional filmmaking, are they working in Pro Photo RGB color space, like with 32-bit color? I mean, is that what the standard is now for filming and projection in? Because a lot of the work that gets done are like for commercials and stuff, and some of those commercials wind up being shown in movie theaters, and the capacity of the movie theater projection screens, like the 8K projector that they have at the North Park right now, is capable of like this really, really wide color gamut.
P3, my understanding is, P3 is the peak of where our technology is right now.
Oh, okay.
So your MacBook, your newest MacBook, it will say display P3. This is what it shows. Rec 2020 is what they're shooting in, but there's no display fully that can show that full spectrum yet.
So they're actually future-proofing the work by shooting in something that they can't actually project.
Right. The fourth Star Wars that was shot like in the 90s, he wanted to shoot it. No, he shot that one with film, but the second one that he shot all digital, but in the sRGB color space, because that was the tech that they had at the time. So it was really limiting, but they could process all of that and so forth. So that's my understanding. But the Academy. They have a similar format that uses, and so when you see Rec 2020, you might also see it, this is why it's so confusing, you might also see it as BT 2020, Broadcast Television 2020. You might also see it as I2UR 2020. Why is it all different? That's where things get messy. Rec is 2020, recommended color space. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say, the latest movie with the IMAX, and why he shot it in IMAX and all is pretty fascinating too. So it depends on what.
But he shot that on 70mm film.
Yeah, when they shoot on
exactly.
film, this is all off. This doesn't matter anymore. Then you're just dealing with the analog limits, which are much broader.
But again, the idea is that if you're not using an IMAX screen and the displays and everything like that, and all, how to translate that to a standard movie projection screen instead of an IMAX screen and stuff like
right.
that. Right.
They'll digitize it, and it'll be brought down to display P3. Only Nolan gets to see the film prints and enjoy that. I think any artist if they're worth their weight, they're making the work for themselves. What do you want to see? And they're making that, and they're hoping other people want to see it. Social media corrupts all of that, but I'm not going there today. So anyway, chromaticity and all of that kind of stuff, and then that gets us into file types, and that crazy world. What can these things actually show? I like the keynote effect. All right, so there's only a tiny portion of these that we can actually use to wrap our production work. So what I try to teach my students and what I try to teach myself is, are we in a production mode or are we in a distribution mode? So your production files versus your distribution files. And then there's a few, and then future files that I want you to know about. AVIF has been around for 6 years, maybe longer. It's where you want to go. This is the holy grail of files, and I'll explain why later. But until then, we have our good old trustworthy JPEG. And then if you're dealing with HDR video, wide color gamut video, we can do this, but there's some caveats there. And what I'm going to show you here in a little bit is how to make an HDR graphic with Affinity. The reason I put this up here is this is just, you're not supposed to do this. I love using, whenever a new tool comes out, I say, what is it supposed to be used for? What else can I use it for? Like, right, how can I use it wrong? Right? And so I have this logo here, and if you scan the QR code, if you're on an HDR display, they're both the same graphic, but one, I've increased the stops by about 2 exposure stops. So it should look, the bottom one should look significantly brighter without distorting the color. Yeah. Okay. So I really cranked it up to see how far I could take it. But if you're scrolling through Instagram and you want your logo to show up, this is a rude thing. I don't think you should use it this way, but you can do it. You can do it. There's nothing wrong. No one's going to stop you. Instagram doesn't know if you're uploading a graphic or a video or a picture of flowers. Yeah.
What's the output for that when you're doing that? Like the output file format?
That's what I'm going to get to.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to get to. Because it could be an AVIF file, but they're a pain in the ass to make right now. And they're not a pain in the ass if you're a normal person. I'm not normal. I have a skewed Adobe hard, and so like right now, the only way to properly make a backwards compatible AVIF file is with Adobe Lightroom, because Adobe does a really good job of taking the free and open source software that only works on the command line and wrapping a nice GUI around it and then selling it back to you for a rent, right? And so I don't like that. But I use Affinity a lot these days. Now, Affinity is great, but like Figma, I say this to my students, it's a big caveat. They make these tools available to you free or really cheap, mainly because, like, and Miguel, it's an awesome presentation. It's like, yeah, you can use AI for now. And so get the market value, take over, and then when everyone's dependent upon it, start extracting from your users. I just want you to be aware of that. And that's why I use Blender, that's why I use other tools. So Affinity's the same way. It's free, yeah, it's free, take it. Until it's not, and you depend upon it. And so as long as you're aware of that dynamic, you can be somewhat inoculated to it, prepare for it to not be free. And I think that's very important. That's nowhere in my talk. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so anyway. So this is an AVIF file on the 8-bit display, and it's not backwards compatible. It looks like garbage. But on my HDR display, it looks great. The reason why AVIF files are great is they can handle the wide color gamut, the Rec 2020. So it can hold more color than my display is anywhere capable of actually displaying. HDR graphics and so forth. But it's only 300 kilobytes at the same resolution and looks way better. Its compression is far more efficient. And WordPress, for the most part, there's all sorts of plugins to be compatible with AVIF files.
I was just going to ask, aren't certain platforms not able to upload or ingest this?
What I found with my cheap host, is you have to go into the PHP modules, and you have to make sure the AVIF module is available, so it can process the AVIF files.
So if you just upload an AVIF to Facebook, or
it probably won't work. It probably won't work yet. And the main reason for that is AVIF requires a much larger processing overhead. But if you haven't noticed, people have been building data centers everywhere, and there's going to be a lot extra processing power soon because there's a bubble about to burst. And so a lot of that is going to be available. So getting yourself ready for that is, not that I've got strong opinions about that too, which is nowhere in my talk. But this is a JPEG, maybe it's a PNG, I think it's a JPEG, 1.5 megabytes. So if you want your sites to be really fast and zippy, AVIF penetration now, it's fully supported by all the major browsers. It's just not fully supported by all the platforms yet. And so, and this follows the AV1 codec, which is also available in video. And so the only way I have found to make a backwards compatible AV1 file without using Adobe Lightroom is to use a command line tool, which is free. But most people, when I go into this, you're like, make it stop. It's not that hard, really. It's not that hard. But I'm not going to do a coding demo in front of a bunch of people because that's not fun at all. But it is possible. Now, when you do this, when you combine the backwards compatible, that file goes from 300 kilobytes to about 0.9 megabytes because it's storing both the backwards compatible image and the forward compatible image in the same file. And the browser is smart enough to pull up the older image or the backwards compatible image if it knows the display can't handle it. So it automatically switches, you don't have to code it. It's pretty brilliant, it's great. And so that's what that QR code actually shows. How are we doing on time? We're doing great on time. So I'm going to do a demo on how to do this. Any questions or anything yet? Are we learning things?
Yes.
Yeah. Good, all right. I'm going to switch this guy over, which I'm not in teaching mode because it's the summer. Where's my mouse?
On a Saturday.
On a Saturday, which I'm really not in. All right, so let's go to displays. Let's do mirror for the bin queue. All right, and I'm going to go to this scary program called Affinity. And if you haven't used it, it's fantastic. I really like it. It's basically the best way I can explain Affinity is it is for now a free program that can do all the things you want to do in Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. You can do all the desktop publishing and everything that you want. You can do all the logo design and everything you want, and it's all completely free. But if you want any of the AI stuff, then you subscribe, which nobody wants, as far as I know, right? But I am seeing, never mind, I'm not going there. Okay, so anyway, I made a folder called Demo, and it's called Demo. And so I have, let's start, I call it Demo Start. So I have a .hdr file. This is just a photo I took on my phone. And I shoot RAW on my phone, but it's basically a RAW image. It's a 16-bit image. And it doesn't look that bright. I took this at the Medina Triennial the other day. And I wanted an image that had some bright contrast or whatever. And when I adjust this on the 8-bit display, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look good at all. But I should be able to do this. Notice down here that it says 32-bit preview, enable EDR. And so basically what I have is enable extended dynamic range. And so if I turn this up, it's going to get significantly brighter, but I'm only working at 8 bits right now. If I was working at 32 bits on my 32-bit display, I wasn't projecting onto this, even though I cranked this up bright, this would still be visible. All the detail behind the panel would still be there, it would just be brighter. Okay, because there's more information there. And likewise, the information that's in the dark area over here, because it's a raw display, if I crank it up, it's like in the actual dark room, when you dodge and burn negatives, you actually have more information there that's in the black, and more information there that's in the burnt out, overexposed areas. In an 8-bit display, if you have an 8-bit image, if you have an overexposed element, and you make it brighter or make it darker, it's just gray or more bright. And so likewise, if you have a black area that's underexposed in an 8-bit image, if you make it brighter, it just becomes gray. But in a higher bit depth image, if you have a black area in the photo and you make it brighter, you get detail. And yeah, did you have a question?
One quick question. Is this app or web-based?
It's an app.
Okay.
It's an app, it's not web-based. And their waveform monitor that they have in their UI isn't compatible with the new extended dynamic range. It only goes 0 to 1. So it doesn't show me that extra headroom that I actually have. So to get around that problem, I go to Blender. Blender has the better dynamics. If you don't want to use Blender, DaVinci also has the better waveforms and newer waveform modifiers. And if you go to Adobe, they have the better waveform modifiers. I really can't do all the things I want to do. So anyway, I'm not going to crank it up here. This is just for display purposes. What I actually want to do is to make what's called an Ultra HDR, which is a specification that Google invented about 5 or 6 years ago. If you have a Google Pixel phone or anything like that, and you look at your photos, you'll notice that some photos suddenly become brighter as you look at them. That's the Ultra HDR feature, and I think it's in the HEIC feature in iPhones as well. Basically, they're using a gain map that says this is this brighter. And so what we're going to do is embed a gain map into a traditional JPEG file that will just, the browser will read to make it more bright. 1 louder, goes to 11, or something along that line. When we make an Ultra JPEG file, it's still an sRGB and 8-bit image because we're adding an element to an old file type. So you don't get the wider color gamut with Ultra HDR. You just get a brighter image that's more engaging. When you saw that logo earlier, it was Ultra HDR, so it wasn't a higher bit depth, it was just brighter. So this is kind of a workaround in between. The better way to go would be to work with AVA files. So what I do is I take the original file here that's just SDR with nothing special going on about it, and I'll just add a exposure adjustment layer, and then I'm just going to crank up that adjustment layer. So that way I'm just brightening it up. Now you can use tone mapping, there's tone mapping tools, you can use other developing tools. This is the fastest way I found, and it works pretty well. And I'm just going to overexpose it by about maybe 2 stops up here. And so on this screen and everything, it's all completely overexposed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this out as an HDR file, a high dynamic range radiance file. It's a 32-bit image. Now this image that I've opened is already an HDR file, but if you take any JPEG or whatever that you bring into Affinity, just go to Document Setup, and change, or assign an ICC profile, and change the color format from RGB8 to RGB32 bits. So that way you have these elements to work with. So this image is already a 32-bit image, which is why if you come over to color and so forth, where is it? If I go over to grayscale or RGB, I switched over to 255. Normally if I'm working over here, I can change the options here. So it actually shows like 32,000 range instead of just 0 to 255. But I'm veering again. So let's go to File, Export. And I'm going to export an HDR file, and I'll just export it over here. Now, your browser cannot open an HDR file. I'll show you what to do with that. So this is demo. I'll call this demo HDR, so I don't get confused today. Save. And then I'm going to just turn off that adjustment layer so I have the normal version of the JPEG. And then I'm going to go to File, Export. I'm just going to choose a JPEG. I'll choose high quality. And then at the bottom, I'm going to embed an HDR image as a gain map. And I'll just embed that HDR that I just made, HDR today. Notice that's 17 megabytes. What it's going to essentially do is extract out a grayscale gain map of the brightest areas of that screen and hide it inside of the JPEG. And then I hit export. It's really important that the HDR is the same resolution as the JPEG. If they're varying resolutions, it won't work, it'll fail. And Affinity is doing the exact same thing that Adobe does. They're taking a free and open source library, it's called lib Ultra HDR, and it's a command line tool, and they've just put a UI around it. So you can do all this with the command line as well. Or, this is something else you can do. You can take any of those free and open source tools. You can go into your AI tool of your choice and say, I need a UI for this, and it'll go, here you go. And you'll have a UI, and it'll work 50% of the time. Okay, so let's go to export, and I'll just call this demo today Ultra HDR, and save. And so if you were on an HDR display and I looked at, oh, did I say it as a JPEG? No. Yeah. Where is it? There it is. Here's the JPEG. It's 2.5 megabytes, so it's a little bit bigger than the original JPEG would be. And if I look at it, on an SDR display, which this is, looks fine. But if I were on an HDR display, it would take those bright areas of the screen and make them, push them up to 11, right? So if you go to brentpatterson.com/test, I already uploaded it and you'll see it there. And you'll see the windows are a little bit brighter. I think I uploaded it there. I didn't add a QR code to it though. Let's go to /test. Yeah. Now on this display, it's going to be burnt out, but on an HDR display, it should look okay. Let me know if it doesn't.
Looks great.
Looks great? Yeah, and it should be a little bit brighter. Yeah. So the important thing is that Ultra HDR is backwards compatible. It'll show the normal JPEG if you're on a conventional display. It'll show the higher res if you're not. So just adding that HDR gain map in Affinity is the way to go. Let's see here. Let's go back over to this guy. And I'm going to promote the Buffalo Blender users. I started a meetup, restarted it. So if you're interested in learning about Blender or anything like that, you can join our meetup. It meets right now every other Tuesday on the campus of Buff State, or you can find my other social medias, which I kind of have deleted all the social medias from my phone, but you can try to follow me in other places. Or if you got any questions, I also do consulting work with clients around the city. And I teach during the normal school year, but I stay pretty busy. And I'll be, like I said, I'll be speaking at the Blender conference here in September, which I'm nervous, but looking forward to about my other stuff. So there's plenty of time for questions, and I'll do the best I can to answer them for you. Yeah.
So the way you just exported that photo, is there any possibility that that won't display well on certain screens, or will be blown out? Like, and what would that look like?
One thing that is a big caveat is if that image gets reprocessed by Instagram, by Facebook, it probably won't work on Facebook. Yeah. If that image gets reprocessed at WordPress or other content management systems, like if you upload an image to WordPress on your on your host or other content management systems, what they do is for optimization, they'll take that one image that you uploaded, and then they'll make like 5 different copies of it at different resolutions. That'll destroy the game map. And so when I upload an Ultra HDR image to my website, I force it to only use that original graphic. So if your site if you've got bandwidth issues, then that could be a problem. But right now, short of using an AVIF file, that's the best way to get around that. There are PHP modules that will not do that, but they're not common yet, if that makes sense. Yeah. So what's the chance that it won't look right? I'd say about 50% right now.
Okay. And
yeah.
If you were exporting for, let's say like the standard is like social media, people are posting photos on social, right? Do you even want to bother with some of this stuff, because these probably are going to compress anyway and lower file size? Will the map be gone anyway?
I'd say it's worth experimenting with, because nuance is like the devil's in the details. And if your work is a little bit brighter, looks a little bit crispier, and stands out from your competition, I'd say it's worth a try.
Right.
It's worth a try. And if you're interested in Blender, Blender is the best way I have found, other than DaVinci. DaVinci's a lot more complicated. In Blender, if you want to export an HDR video, you can take standard dynamic range images and easily make them an HLG, which is a hybrid log gamma version of that file. If you're on Instagram, you'll see, if you're on the browser or on the app, there's lots of apps there, or lots of posts, especially videos, that look about 3 times brighter than the surrounding posts. And I think that is what you're going to see continuously, and everybody's turning their screen down to handle that.
Yeah, I think those are in the individual upload settings. When you're uploading stuff on Instagram, there are settings that you can set for defaults for every time you upload something, which will allow for HDR, because they're starting to incorporate this stuff for real, but you actually have to opt in to doing that, because you know that it's if they did it automatically, the sheer amount of information that they're processing would Verizon, I mean, they have the capacity, but.
One thing that happens when you upload HDR, to Instagram in particular, it won't be HDR right away because HDR takes longer to post-process on their servers. So if you upload it, it might not be in HDR for an hour or more as it processes later.
But it will look better.
Yeah. And I make, we make our own animations and stuff. Instagram is optimized to upload videos directly from your phone's camera roll. And it works great if you're just doing that. But if you're producing your own stuff, exporting them from Premiere or Final Cut Pro or whatever, then you have to follow the specifications. And HLG is the best approach to making sure your HDR images make it to Instagram without getting chewed up. And so I do like these nebulas and stuff that I post all the time. And if those aren't compressed right, then they look like garbage, both on YouTube and on Instagram. I upload most of my work these days to Vimeo, which handles it pretty well. But you got to pay for Vimeo if you want limits. But yeah, good questions. Good questions.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Just curious about where were you standing when you took that photo of that deliciously decrepit wall?
That's an art installation at the Triennial in Medina, and there's this really cool, I can't remember the name of the artist, but there's this
Assad Raza.
there's this water trail. I don't ever remember names. I remember color space names and the dates that deal with it. But there's this water trail that you can walk on in your bare feet, and it's very refreshing.
Yeah, the whole Medina Triennial right now, it's up until September, and it's a really, really beautiful, they kind of took over the town. And it's a small town, and there's international artists. The work is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's
There's
really
a curator walk every Sunday at 1 p.m. And it's really worth seeing, but it's mostly concerned with ecological aspects and the principles of extraction, which I think is interesting given what you're talking about.
Oh
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, very good. But the better displays are coming, so make the better display work now, and I think you'll be in better shape. And remember, AVIF is the file to keep your eye on, because that's, I think, going to be the common file to publish on the web moving forward, the AV1 codec. And there's a subreddit for it with a whole bunch of nerds. And yeah. But thanks for nerding out with me. I think it's been 2 hours of heavy nerds, and so this is my stuff.